All right. Hello, everybody. I'm David Prather, Vice President of the ARMA Metro New York City, Long Island chapter. Excuse me. Our final session of the day is making a business case and leveraging your service providers. For this session, we have a panel of leading financial, legal, consulting, and technology professionals who are here with an interactive session to discuss what you need to do to develop a persuasive information governance or records management business case. I'm going to turn this over to our moderator, David Smith. David's principal advisor in global and strategic accounts at Iron Mountain, and he will introduce the rest of today's panel. I will see you at the end for the closing remarks, but let me turn it over to David.
Thank you, David, and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining the Confirm Conference and joining this illustrious list of panelists for what we hope is a very interactive session. So you saw the topic there. We're looking to discuss how to develop a business case, the value of it, and different approaches to leveraging business cases and those around you who are stakeholders and interested parties. David did an introduction for me, so thank you, David, and I'll just hand it over to Lauren and let Lauren, Derek, and Christy introduce themselves. Lauren?
Well, hi, everybody, and thank you, David and David. So a pleasure to be on this panel. I actually feel very strongly about being able to work together with vendors and leveraging them. I'm currently at S&P Global. I'm the Director of Information Governance. S&P Global, some of you still think of it as Standard & Poor's, and with the ratings being a major product line that the company has. But indeed, we're much more diverse than that, and they rebranded about 7 years ago to just be S&P Global. In that role, the primary thing I've done is create governance artifacts that the company can leverage and then head up along with the business or IT with their initiatives to bring information governance principles and requirements by design into either new applications, into business processes, etc. Prior to that, I was at Credit Suisse for several years, and prior to that, Lehman, which sounds like my entire career has been in financial services, but alas, it has not. I've worked as a consultant for Milliken and Associates and MDY, and it's those programs that they sold were basically consulting for information governance, but at that time it was really more referred to as records and information management, which of course is part and parcel. I'll pass it on to Derek.
Folks, and I'm sorry I'm not present, literally, having a non-technical issue, so unable to appear in person. So my name is Derek Arthur. Other than a stint with the post office during my last year in college, I've been practicing this records and information governance trade for, I'll say, over 40 years now. I literally grew up in law firms. I'm currently the Director of Records and Information Governance at a relatively large law firm called King & Spalding. I've been here since 2016. I helped the firm, with regard to people, process, and technology around records and IG and risk and all that other stuff that ties into it. Prior to joining King & Spalding, I've held roles at Cooley, Proskauer. I had the pleasure of working with Lauren at MDY some time ago. I've served on various IT, IG related organizations. I'm currently the treasurer of the New York chapter. I've been a member for well over 30 years now as well. So with that said, I'll pass it on to Christy.
All right. Thank you to my esteemed colleagues, my esteemed panelists. I'm Christy Robison. I have worked with Lauren Barnes and have collaborated in some of the ARMA meetings with David Smythe previously. Derek is new to me, but we've had an opportunity to meet in preparation for this panel. And I am a consultant. So I've had Paint Rock Consulting up and running since late 2012. Prior to that, I was in the oil and gas industry in upstream, downstream, major projects, um, all over the place, and have really kind of found my footing in consulting and IT, kind of the intersection of business value and IT in the consulting realm, which allows me to hop from vertical to vertical or industry to industry, and I find that very, very fulfilling. Um, all right, so with that, we will start our discussion. Just as an FYI, we would like this to be a very collaborative engagement. Anytime that you have questions or comments, please feel free to drop them in the chat. We are monitoring the chat window as we proceed. Um, our focus is on making a business case, and the reason that you would want to do that is to have an outcome eventually. So we thought a good place to start would be defining what a business case is. Those of you who have been around for a bit have probably been involved in creating or championing different business cases, but for some newer employees or people new within the information governance or records information management realm, it might be a whole different animal to put together a business case, especially if you don't necessarily have direct reports or delegates, or if you don't have, authorized spending capability. In those cases, the business case is the way to go, and you would leverage your people internally to help do the various steps that we see through that process. So defining and shaping your executive summary. Why should the business do this thing that you would like to do or that you're proposing? Um, Analyzing what the outputs or potential risks might be of that particular solution. There's something here that you'll see highlighted called the cost of doing nothing. That's really a thing that becomes overlooked oftentimes. There's the cost of doing nothing, which could grow over time if there's risk involved. It's always good to have kind of that as a baseline in a business case that you might be developing. With that analysis, roll that up into a recommendation, and ideally that would include buy-in and further support from the stakeholders that you've identified and engaged in step one. You will have some metrics and some value and some benefits defined that you've been able to identify in your analysis in step two. And when that's all bundled and blessed and ready, then comes the submittal and a call to action. Oftentimes, submittal is to a larger group or an executive committee or a steering committee. And in larger organizations, that just doesn't happen very quickly. There's often some Q&A time between perhaps executive sponsors and the people who want to do the business case to answer any questions that might not have been covered initially or query some of the analysis that went into developing the business case. But ultimately, you want what you've developed and delivered to be a strong foundation for your executive team or your steering committee to be able to drive data-driven decisions.
I have a couple of quick comments, Christy. So I like the way this is laid out. Fully agree with it. There are a couple of terms that I would interject to give this a little bit different color. The first would be you want to know who your your stakeholders are, certainly, and there's a term that we use from the marketing side, if you will, called the persona. So who is the real buyer of whatever your business case is targeted towards? Another term, and it's important to really understand that, because if you can develop a business case and be talking to a group of stakeholders, and the person who was really in charge of the funds or would be most impacted may not be fully versed. And then you end up spending a lot of time reviewing and revising, or not having success in driving the outcome you want. Another term is champion. Always important, and maybe somebody within your stakeholder group, and it may be somebody separate from your stakeholder group, but always a good idea to have somebody who says, we really need to do this. There's a term that I learned not too long ago called BANT, budget, authority, need, and timeline. And hadn't heard that acronym succinctly until fairly recently, but I like that one. If you don't see those four things, you've got some further discovery to do. And I think discovery is extremely important in all of this, because some of us do have a tendency to say, oh, I know what this problem is. I've seen it before. I know how to solve it. Let me go do it. There are also folks who say, I haven't done a business case in ages, or I may never have done one. I think it helps structure thought. So I think it's highly advisable to do some reviewing of how to develop a business case and start leveraging it as a tool to be more effective in your business.
And that could be for anything that you're trying to do internally too. If you are trying to, for example, build an internal small group to do a particular thing or study a particular thing, you would want to go through these same steps for at least your foundation. The next thing that we'll
The one
touch
thing
on,
too, was just to make sure that people at the end of this see that what they're going to, I think you had what they're going to get out of this, but ensure that along the way we show them what they're going to get. Even though the business case is built, talk to them early on about what they're going to see throughout this process.
that's an excellent point. Yes. Thanks, Derek. So the other part of the discussion that we want to have today as part of this panel is how you can supercharge your business case. Once you have one built, that's great. If you want to add a few bonus layers around that to try and ensure that you get the quickest approval or a smooth pass to approval, then there are a couple of additional things that you can do. One is early socialization. Like David mentioned, identifying your stakeholders and knowing your customer. They may be two different people or lots of different groups of people. They may be internal and external. So having some early feedback and buy-in from them as you're building your business case will only make it that much stronger. The earlier you have people involved in the idea behind your business case, the more vested that they will feel. If it's something that they're approving or something that they're behind, they'll feel a little bit more invested in helping you push that over the line and make that happen. So that would be some of the refining that you might get from feedback. Doing demos or some hands-on or seeing what a solution might look like is also very important. Part of that feedback cycle also is going to be around mitigating problems, mitigating roadblocks. That could be those could be personality driven or issue driven or budget driven. So trying to pre-identify where those roadblocks might happen is also a good way to find the channels that you might need to pay a little bit more attention to or provide a little bit more detail for as you move forward.
Well, I would just like to add that there's also a big picture that it's really on us to share out to our stakeholders. And that big picture includes that impact on all those stakeholders. We should have an understanding of what that is. And a corollary to that is also among those stakeholders to identify some key partners where they would be also the advocates for not only developing the business case but selling the business case. And part of that too is under that column of leverage your vendors. I mean, how many times have I thought, well, they not only know more than what I do about this, but they are used to articulating it. And that is super helpful for sure. But along with that, those premier stakeholders that you've identified as advocates because of what they will benefit, or how their work aligns with your work, and frankly, it can be within the business, within IT, within senior management. And I would say that have them also meet the vendor or vendors, have them really a part of certain key points in that development, and with that socialization, because then they'll have a stake in it. They'll have potentially some skin in the game, and really be not just that advocate, but a booster for all facets of the ultimate project. But first and foremost, to get the business case over the finish line.
Yeah, Lauren, you definitely want to get others, again, other partners, as you mentioned. I mean, marketing, technology, whatever other groups, make them aware of what you're trying to accomplish. Especially if you're a newbie, get in line with them. They may be around a little bit longer. They may have an ear. You also just want to leverage them to say, well, how do you guys get your stuff done? I'm going to take a page out of that book and follow suit. So for sure.
Yeah.
And, so going back to something that David mentioned earlier, there are some of us on this panel who have been on both sides of that fence. So on one side, being an employee of an enterprise or a large company, and being responsible for building a business case. And then on the other side, as vendors. I know that I'm in that situation. I think David is also, I know Lauren has been. So from the vendor side of things, your vendor is always going to want to help see you succeed. And if that's their specialty or their specific line of business, they're likely going to have access to more up-to-date data or metrics or research that can help you build your case or build your ROI, or put some quantifiable data behind some of the assumptions that your business case might have.
I would add the breadth of perspective. So we frequently hear, what are our peers doing? Or we can offer that the financial industry is in a certain position. We understand what the peers are doing. Maybe there's some, there's an association of some kind that's sharing information, but you can bring information from another industry, oil and gas, pharmaceuticals, healthcare, life sciences, what have you, that advancements that are being made there that just haven't been considered and could apply to another industry. And the last point I'll make about leveraging your vendors, and this is a tough one, is return on investment, especially the industry or the discipline that we're in. But there is some good research out there. People talk about storage costs, but being able to quantify or at least use the standards that some of the providers will use around productivity. And e-discovery tends to be a little bit more quantifiable, but what about regulatory risks or other risks? Quantifying those can be a challenge, but frequently vendors can bring standards to the table that may still be challenged by the buyers, but they provide a perspective. And I would also say ROI is not always just a numbers game. There's rationale, there's narrative to be provided as well.
That's also where the persona aspect can really help in your presentation of your business case. Having those different personas identified so that you can speak to, here's what the experience is currently for someone in this type of a role or responsibility. And then after this business case, if it's approved and implemented, here's what that persona's process might look like after the fact. Having some of those different personas and before and after scenarios identified is also very helpful in communicating to your approval team or your executive team that this is something that has been well thought out and well prepared. Involving vendors also underlines that. If you're as an executive recipient of a business case, if I was seeing deep analysis or good analysis and numbers along with vendor input, that helps add some reputational good karma, reputational information, and acceleration to what your business case might otherwise be able to see.
Well, and there's an interesting little truth about what a large company can be facing with. First of all, there are lots of initiatives generally going on in a large company, and rarely do you know what they all are. My favorite is when they are all called project names with names that have nothing to do with what the actual initiative is. Project Lincoln. All right, well, what's that? And the naming conventions are always amusing, but given the scope of whatever project and business case you're going after, two things are true. One, there are chances are that your big company, if you're in a big company, or a company that may be medium-sized but somewhat siloed, because that just happens or just is, that the vendor may actually know what the left and right hand are doing because the vendor is working with both initiatives, and they can help make connections and identify commonalities and shared goals even within your own company. So it's not just that benchmarking with other law firms or other financial institutions that vendor might be working with and that you're in that discipline, but they can also have those internal to you contacts. And there is a great advantage to being candid with your vendors and say, what do you know about what other groups in my company are working on with you? Because you can then leverage that too, both from building the business case and maybe even further down the line, a possible advantage around pricing and things like that when you get for that get to that point. I throw that out because I've been frequently surprised by how much is going on, and it was a potentially niche project that I have, but in reality it impacts other things that my colleagues on the other side of the world or in the other side of the business are working on.
Yeah, Lauren, I mean, these interrelated projects, to your point, you may think that, it's just your world. But again, other piece of the organizations, they may have this $5 million budget, and you're like, all I need is a couple 100,000. So let me throw it in. Let me throw it in theirs, and it ties in quite nicely. And again, other organizations may be able to leverage whatever it is that you're looking for.
That's a great point. Yeah, I think a lot of organizations, either regulatory driven or just from the line of the business that they're in, have those silos and will continue to have those types of silos. So, being aware of other projects that you might be able to collaborate with or tie to through the vendor or with the vendor's help, those are great suggestions.
And
And
I'm
that,
curious. Go ahead,
I'm
Lauren.
sorry, Dave.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, and that also gives an opportunity to give that bigger view in building that case too. You can help set the context in that that has that 30,000 foot view and how things are interrelated all the way, along with making the more detailed points and the more detailed set of requirements and the more detailed outcome. But it's like, what is that context? And if you have context, ready made within your own company, you don't want to, you want to be connected, and you want to also appear connected, so that there is you set a standard of collaboration, even if it ends up you don't get a couple of 100,000 out of that, $3 million budget thing. Even if you don't do that, then you're building that relationship. So I throw that out, that there's, you know it's the it's that larger thing that you can also make the point around.
My comment is that to Derek's point, the devil's advocate would be you have to be careful about scope creep because that is also that an analysis paralysis, right? You can keep building the business case and lose the window to actually achieve your objectives, right? So that's certainly a great concern. But Anchor Sheth earlier in the Confirm conference actually invited and said, if you're an IG professional or a RIM professional, you should be talking to your cybersecurity leads and your cybersecurity team, because they are getting more and more budget. Good or bad, they need it. There's too much challenge there. There are too many concerns. And what IG can do for cybersecurity or together with cybersecurity is highly valuable. I've seen that myself in my career, but that's a question for all of you. Where's the balance, or what's your perspective on scope creep versus leveraging where you can find budget, or however you want to frame it?
I think you get really good PMs and people who are really as well as yourself. Lauren, I know you and I did a little PMing in our days as well. But to your point, I mean, that's on one side, and you've just got to the point of leveraging other areas. Cyber risk, yeah, that's key. Again, I talked about going to other people for cash. It's real simple. I tell them that I want to delete content, or I want to move stuff to this secure location, and we all fall under the CIO's umbrella. But yeah, they've got a really huge budget, and but I get your point around scope creep. Again, it takes, to the point of like dynamic leadership, whether it's you or someone in your organization. 3+ years ago, we got a new CIO. Nothing against the former CIO, but again, someone who was into information. Prior to that, I, for example, was reporting into the general counsel's office. When I interviewed with the organization, I never even met the CIO. And now I'm reporting to this new one. So it really just kind of, again, the people within the organization who you can look to help, whether they be inside or out. Some organizations, they're consulting companies who, they will live and die for, right? So it's, you got PwC, recommending something to a bank, and that bank is going to jump all on it because they've got that long-standing relationship with PwC. So figure out how you can tie in with the PwC folks. So it's 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. But to your point, you've got to get it moving. Otherwise, if you just sit there, I'll tell a little story later. And I sat around waiting for opportunity, and then it just became so easy. It was unreal.
Well, to cycle back what David mentioned, I think and from a zoomed out perspective, I'm a tech consultant who's an IG expert. So oftentimes I work with people who are focused on either governance and compliance or tech, and not often both. Um, but they're really a Venn diagram, and it's a very fuzzy Venn diagram because information governance is part and parcel of your security structure. And with regulations that are coming online this year, along with some of the zero trust security requirements, that's probably for large enterprises already to some degree connected to your governance and compliance solutions. So, if, as Derek mentioned, if that's where the budget funds are applicable, maybe it's from an information governance or records management standpoint, maybe that would be a good internal organization to partner with. Have them see the value of what your business case is, and also applaud your efforts or support or advocate for your efforts.
I would like to just sort of throw in another thinking. I know not all of us, and at any given time it can change, are in a senior enough position to lead an initiative like this. But having said that, it does not mean that your influence and your perspective is not important and should be leveraged. And that is possibly first socializing with your manager, who may or may not be managing records management or information governance, but will have some adjacent, or a collective, like Derek reports to the CIO. I report up into risk and compliance, and that compliance piece may well go back to legal, where it was for a long time, as opposed to where it is now in risk. And most of the folks who are in leadership positions, or even your direct manager, they expect you to be the subject matter expert, and they really want the ideas coming from you, because you would know. So I would, if you are, keep yourself informed, particularly about what vendor offerings are, or what the vendors actually do in general, and pick their brain around, well, what else do you do? Because I know I need help, not sure where to turn. The convincing your manager and getting them on board for this is key. And I just want to say, no matter what level you are at, because again, you're the expert, and perhaps one of many experts, but good ideas should not be limited just from coming from a different place in the organization, coming from you, the person who's doing the work,
Dealing with it.
dealing with it, I think is important.
Yeah. Well, we wanted this to be a bit of an open panel discussion. We do have a comment from John about his experience in pharma, and how oftentimes it takes a lot of detailed explanation to be able to quantify risks in, for example, clinical trial studies. I can imagine there are some industries where the level of detail probably is a significant administrative effort. I was going to say burden. I mean effort. And pharma is one of those. So we wanted to share, if in lieu of active questions and comments right now, we wanted to share some of our experiences of business cases that went well, and some business cases that maybe didn't go so well. And I believe Derek has an example he'd like to share.
Well, so I hope my story ties in. I'll try to touch on some of the things we discussed. And really, this just comes around trying to get some cash for a destruction, retention project, right? And oddly enough, I got volunteered or voluntold to to participate in this, but I really can't recall the last time I wrote or had to write a formal business case with like multiple pages. I think if anything, it was a line item in the budget with a brief explanation. And I'm lucky enough to work for an organization. It's a law firm. We're not regulated, so it's not so formal. So my story may not necessarily apply, but hopefully, there's bits and pieces of it that takes. Um, so, again, the number one thing I think you look to build is really what you need or what you think your organization needs or what they really, not what they want, but really what they need. I may have mentioned I'm at King and Spalding since 2016, going on 7 years. As an organization, we've grown quite a bit. Over the years, I've been involved in projects, or the group really has been in projects, around moves and restacks to try to reduce our paper footprint. A potential document management project that turned into a let's keep it and just upgrade the tool project. We had a big bout with COVID, which helped us push digital transformation. We replaced our record system. And over the last few years, a significant transition to various of the Microsoft 365 tools, including Teams. And now we're in a process where we're doing systems and data migration to the cloud. All along the way, I've been trying to push to try to, help us better understand how and where data is maintained and how to better manage it. And for me, in addition to just really those things, it was more about trying to build trust and create relationships within the organization. We kind of talked about that early on. I was going to say build it and they will come, but maybe if they trust you, they'll help you out a little bit. So we're all in the business of managing information. Of course, one of the things, again, I talked to leadership about early on was around, all this data that we had, physical and electronic. We had a lot of it. We've had a policy in place for, many years. However, the firm really lived up to the side of let's just keep our matter files as opposed to destroying them. But as I mentioned, ever since the early days and throughout, I've been trying to be a voice in the heads of my COO. He's the guy who signs on the dotted line for the budget, as well as the general counsel's office, who are in my space really our godfathers. If they say it, people will follow.
Got it.
Or if I'm trying to do something, they'll say, "Yeah, just do it, people." So they're pretty smart folks, though. And over time, I think with the help of regulations, GDPR, privacy regulations, data breaches, security breaches impacting organizations, including some of our clients, and of course our peer law firms. We've seen, almost over, on a daily basis, we see folks getting hacked. The cost of migrating data, I think folks looked at, because we were moving to the cloud, the cost of migrating data and storing data, even though, again, it's supposedly a little cheaper, it's still not so cheap. So throughout all of that, it got to the point where, as opposed to I was asking for, hey, let's destroy this data, it really came full circle. They started asking me, Derek, when are you going to start destroying data? So, over the years, we've worked with our vendor partner, Iron Mountain. We renewed our contract some years ago. And during that time, we talked about, strategy and cost regarding destruction. And we worked to build some of that stuff into our contract with the plan that, one day we would at least execute from a paper perspective. We've talked again about leveraging your sponsors or our sponsors, the folks who are here today. I think even some of our speakers are in this business, whether they're consultants or otherwise. They're all really suited to help you or help any organization with building a business case. They've done it before. As I mentioned earlier, I think that there are others in your organization who've done them before as well. Whether you're new to it, new to the organization or otherwise, I think it's good to just kind of, again, leverage your business partners within the organization. Like I said, all that said, it's a pretty costly venture to destroy stuff. Conversely, we're storing 500,000 boxes in storage, and upwards, it's probably about 2 petabytes of data in the cloud. We've been doing a bit of cleanup over the last few years. Securing our data a little bit more, putting stuff into very, very, very cold storage where it's not so expensive.
Mhm.
But notwithstanding, without getting into all the gory details, I mentioned a number earlier. I won't repeat it, but with all that said, it was pretty easy to add a six-figure line item to my existing storage budget. I didn't have to go out to, the InfoSec folks. I'm sort of, even though I fall under the IT organization, I have a separate budget. And like I said, this all happened sort of building up the last 7 years, literally, while there was not so much to focus on destroying content. Today there is, perfect world in a sense, literally just tied it into my existing storage budget, which again was a relatively large number. But when you add in, whatever the cost was that I was looking to get, you know, like I said, my COO was telling me, "Hey, Derek, when are you going to add this to the budget?" So no business case needed whatsoever. Um, with that said, all I'm trying to say is you got to start early. Maybe not 7 years early, but start early enough. Understand what's needed, and get help from those that you're trying to even get the sign off from. Right. So if you've got the ear of your CEO, COO, or your CIO or your manager, have them just try to, have them escalate as need be for you on your behalf. Give them whatever data sets they need, and I'm sure they'd be more than willing to help you along the line. So hopefully that kind of covered that piece of it. And again, I think it touched pieces of all the components I hope that we spoke of earlier.
Sure. Yep. Um, so in your case, it sounds like your efforts are kind of not necessarily chunked pieces of projects, but kind of being blended into your operations, blended into your IT and your way of work and your company initiatives, which is great. That
Oh,
makes it less interruptive and intrusive to people.
I think, Christy, we may be looking at this as Derek has a less formal business case than what we've probably alluded to
yeah,
so
sure.
far. But what I took from that, Derek, a couple of things. You mentioned the pandemic and some cost concerns and the cyber risk concerns. So we frequently talk about trigger events. That's an opportunity. Something is triggered, a large regulatory issue, litigation, something from an audit, something that triggers an opportunity that may allow for a less formal business case, if you will. And another one, you joke about 7 years. Sometimes, there are other priorities for whatever reason. It could be mergers, it could be all kinds of things. But one of the ideas is if you structure your idea very well and you work through a business case process, the answer may be not right now, but when that opportunity comes in the future, you've already got some information well structured and you can capitalize on that window where you might be able to get that budget to work. And I've said many times in my career, sometimes you come up with a really good idea and nobody really listens. And 6 months later, they come back and somebody says, "Hey, I've got this great idea." And you just kind of look at them and go, "Huh. Yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Let's work on that now and push it through."
That's a
But
common occurrence in oil and gas industry for projects. It's fastly moving, and some components of the business, project approvals are tied to what the cost of a barrel of Brent crude is that particular week. So, there are a lot of things that can turn on or off a potential project switch at any given time. So something to do when you do have a business case that might get mothballed, for example, is make sure that your information is correct, that you have the people attribution to the people who helped collaborate on that business case, because you don't know, it might be 2 years before somebody decides to take that figuratively off the shelf and dust it off and maybe update some numbers. That way you can still kind of credit the people who did the original work, but you can also build on that foundation of data and analysis and collaboration that they've already built and just carry it that much further.
Yeah, great point. Any questions out there? Mr. Prather, do we have beating hearts out there? Not his. He's having a snack.
Well, you know, I guess I'm wondering in the audience, are any of you contemplating or have already started building a business case at this time? Because if we've steered away from what you might have wanted to expect to hear in this session, we have a few minutes that we can course correct and say and discuss something that might be quite relevant to your situation. So is that possibly the case?
That's a good question. It'd be nice to know if we've completely diverged from what perhaps the audience expectations were for this discussion.
I'm wondering if the audience is still there.
Well, another quick comment is there are plenty of
Thanks,
templates,
Jennifer.
if you will, out in the marketplace. You can just do a quick search. But Jen, go ahead.
So Jennifer, okay.
Go ahead, Christy. Go ahead.
Jennifer has posted a few comments. She's in the process of building a few. So record storage discussion or destruction, risk assessment. That sounds like they might be different building blocks of, or maybe related building blocks of a potentially larger subject that might have that, opportunity for tie-in or support from related projects. And Daniel Williams has chimed in with he hasn't built a business case yet, but we'll definitely use some of this information. That's great. Coalition building being difficult. That really is. I think when people leave high school, they feel like, hey, I don't have to necessarily do all the networking or smooth people over and I can just jump into my work world and be in a silo, or just jump into my college courses and be in a silo. But yes, there's a lot of soft skills still involved in driving a business case and driving collaboration.
So Jen says she's not at the table with the cool kids, but as I mentioned, I had not interviewed with the CIO when I got to the firm, and literally I think it was day 2. I went knocking on the door and said, "Hey, this is who I am." I literally asked him why he thought we didn't, why he wasn't part of the interview process. He gave me a good long story, which I found very clear and true at the time. But I said, we've got to get way past that and make sure that we don't go down that alley. And something like lunch and then discussion about the Amarone wine that he liked was very helpful as well. So I mean, it takes a lot. I hear you, Jennifer.
I want to jump on the being at the table with the cool kids just for more general reference, I guess. I've been fortunate enough to be collaborating with a couple of the hyperscalers, approaching various clients and just talking about information governance. The reactions have been rather amusing from some of these folks who are, super high tech, high volume, breadth of capability is just enormous. And you start talking to them about some of what we do, and they think they've just discovered gold or something like that. It's really been amusing. So the cool kids may not be so smart. So share your smarts, Jennifer. I think they need it.
One of my favorite phrases is from Shirley Chisholm, who was the first Black Congresswoman. She's from New York. I think she represented Brooklyn. I think.
Mhm.
Not sure, but and she ran for president in 1972. But she was in politics for a long time, and one of her lessons was, if they don't offer you a seat at the table, bring your own chair. And if there's a project that you have heard about or something that you're passionate about, that's what drives ideas, that's what drives collaboration and enthusiasm. So even if it's not a project that you're necessarily involved in, bring your own chair. Go talk to somebody who's involved in that project, and maybe you can share with them ways that you might be able to help them build a business
And
case, for
Christy, that
example.
I agree, and it's I'll say bring your own chair, but and not that you stalk them, but hang out right next to the elevator and have your elevator pitch sort of ready, know who they are,
Yes.
and just randomly get on the elevator with them and say hello.
But and along with that, other people's expertise in your organization is also a something that we can learn from. I mean, there are, key technology folks that, man, I've learned so much from them, and I wasn't that shabby with whatever I knew, but man, it was not as much as they knew, which was obvious. But I'm better at my job for collaborating with them. So anyway, I just sort of say that it goes both ways, and you build consensus and a relationship with the elevator. Uh, speech in or out of the elevator.
Hey, Jenna, I see Anna asked a question. In my space, again, yours is quite different. We worked with the general counsel's office and InfoSec, and we just started locking down data, right? We said, if it hadn't been touched in 5 years, worked our way down to 3 years, worked our way down to 1 year. And this was really unstructured data, not necessarily email and the like, but we had a ton of content on our file shares. And we just started saying if it hadn't been touched, we have some tools that can allow us to do those kind of searches. If it hadn't been touched or accessed in X amount of time, we're just going to lock it down to a group of 5 or 6 people in the organization. If someone wanted to go in and click on that file, they could click on it, but it would say it's restricted. You need to contact someone. And we had this whole process of not just giving them access again, but finding out why and what they needed.
I'm impressed that they even knew it was there, Derek, because often out of sight, out of mind, right?
Yeah, well, lots of terabytes moved offline as a result of that, and again, they might come back 2 years later and say, "Oh, it was something that I needed," but 9 times out of 10, it's not. But yeah, locked it down first and didn't have many issues.
And you can factor in the cost of keeping, that data and the risk of keeping overaged data.
Yeah.
Well, I think we've come to the end of our session for the most part. We do have some closing remarks. I'd like to thank everybody else again on this panel for letting me participate with all of you wonderful experts. And then I think Rishi is going to um, come on and talk to our closing session. Or would it be
Or
David?
David? I know they're
I think
on.
David Prather was jumping on.
While
In
we're
the
waiting for
meantime,
them.
thank you all of our participants for participating.
There we go.
Sorry, folks, I'm not David. It's Rishi here. How's everybody doing today?
Great.
Well, now that we know it's you.
Oh, Lauren, come on.
No, I mean that. It's great. We had 2 Davids. We can just have one.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you very much for what I'm sure everybody will agree was an informative session. The content today was great. Hopefully we continue to collaborate and we continue to talk to each other and pass along ideas. I think ultimately, especially you all started this with the closing and getting to know what everybody's experience is. That will help everyone on their day-to-day, especially for individuals that are looking to write their own business cases if they do need to. I will, for the most part, I will say bye to you folks right now while I give the last closing remarks. Again, David, Derek, Christy, Lauren, thank you very much. I really appreciate you all
Thanks, Rishi.
helping us with the closing today. Folks, I hope you all enjoyed today's conference. I just again want to thank you all for attending today's Confirm 2023. Again, thank you for all the sponsors. Without them, this would not be possible. And again, thank you for all the presenters. An email will be sent within the coming days just to give you all your certifications codes, as well as links to where the recordings of the sessions will be. All right. Again, from ARMA Metro NYC Long Island, thank you again for joining and have a good day.